Good evening, and welcome back. I'm the Yawning Historian, and tonight, as always, there is nothing you need to do and nowhere you need to be. Settle into your pillow, pull the blanket up to where it feels right, and let your eyes close whenever they are ready. Tonight we are visiting the world as it was before electricity, the long thousands of years when night was truly night, and we are going to discover how people actually slept in it. We will sit in a small town as the candles are counted and the fires are banked. We will sway in a hammock on a wooden ship far out at sea. We will burrow into a box bed while the snow piles up outside. We will follow the slow, comfortable history of the things people wore to bed, and we will spend a desert night in a caravanserai on the Silk Road, among camels and merchants in a sky absolutely overflowing with stars. And at the very end, we will stand quietly on a street corner and watch the first lamps come on the night the old darkness began to end. None of it requires anything from you at all. You only have to listen and drift. Our first story begins in a small market town in the south of England, in the 1780s, on an ordinary evening in late autumn. If you had stood on the hill above the town as the sun went down, you would have seen something that no one alive today has ever really seen. You would have seen a town turning off, not the way our towns dim at night, from blazing to merely bright. This was different. As the last of the daylight drained out of the sky, the town below simply, gradually, went dark. A window glowed here and there, a faint orange point no stronger than a struck match. A lantern bobbed along a lane and disappeared. And then, within an hour of sunset, the town had all but vanished into the countryside around it, a cluster of deeper shadows among the hills, under a sky that came all the way down to the rooftops. The reason for this was wonderfully simple, and it shaped every single evening of every single life in that town. Light cost money, real money, and the moment you understand that one fact, the entire world before electricity begins to make sense. Consider the candle, the ordinary workhorse candle of the 18th century. It was made of tallow, which is rendered animal fat, usually from sheep or cattle, and it was, by every account that survives, a fairly humble object. It smoked. It guttered. It had to be trimmed constantly because the wick did not burn away on its own, and an untrimmed candle drowned itself in its own fat within the hour. And a single one of those candles, giving less light than a modern nightlight, cost roughly what a working man earned in an hour or two of labor, depending on the year and the place. Accounts from the period suggest that an ordinary household might burn its way through a serious fraction of its income if it tried to light its evenings the way we light ours. So nobody did. Instead, the evening was rationed. Light was spent the way money was spent, carefully, deliberately, and mostly not at all. A family sat around one candle, not five. The candle was lit late, after the last usable daylight was truly gone, and it was snuffed early. There are household manuals from the period, patient little books of domestic advice, that treat the lighting of a second candle as a decision requiring thought, the way we might think about turning on the heating. Fine sewing, letter writing, and reading happened in a small circle of light, perhaps an arm's width across, with the rest of the room in darkness, and everyone else in the household arranged their evening around that single warm point, like planets around a modest sun. The poorest households could not afford even that. Their answer was the rushlight, and the rushlight deserves a moment of appreciation, because it may be the humblest lighting technology in all of history. To make one, you took a rush, the common marsh plant that grows along every stream in England, and you peeled away most of the outer green skin, leaving one thin strip to hold the soft pith together. Then you dipped that pith, again and again, into melted fat, the kitchen's saved scraps of grease, until it had a thin waxy coat. The result was a drooping, fragile taper about as long as your forearm, and it burned with a small, steady flame for perhaps 20 minutes or half an hour. It cost, effectively, nothing. Children made them in batches on summer evenings, dozens at a time, laid up in boxes for the winter, and the phrase to burn the candle at both ends comes to us, some accounts suggest, from the rushlight, because a rush held in a slanted iron clip could indeed be lit at both ends, giving twice the light for half the time, a small extravagance for special moments. A rushlight evening was a short evening, and that was the point. The world before electricity did not fight the darkness. It made a brief, modest stand against it, an hour or two of mending and talk and a chapter read aloud, and then it surrendered gracefully and went to bed. At the other end of the scale, in the great houses, there was beeswax. A beeswax candle burned clean and bright and smelled faintly of honey instead of roasting fat, and it cost several times what tallow cost, which made it one of the quiet status symbols of the age. When a fine household held a ball and lit 50 wax candles in a single room, every guest understood exactly what was being said, in the way we might understand a fountain or a fireworks display. The wax candle even had its own little afterlife economy. In wealthy houses, the ends of the candles, the stubs too short to sit safely in a holder, were by long custom the property of the servants, who collected them, sold them, or burned them in their own attic rooms. Accounts suggest that in some great households the candle stubs were a meaningful part of a footman's income, carefully gathered every morning the way another man might gather eggs. Nothing that made light was ever thrown away. Light was wealth, and even its crumbs were counted. Because light was wealth, people learned to do a remarkable number of things without it. This is one of the loveliest lost skills of the old world. A practiced knitter did not need to see her needles, and there are accounts of women knitting steadily in complete darkness, or with their eyes on something else entirely, their hands running on by themselves, so that even the black hours after the candle was out could be made to produce a stocking. Men mended nets and whittled spoons by firelight glow alone. Bread was set to rise. Cheese was pressed. Ropes of onions were plaited, all in a light we would consider useless. Hands knew their work the way feet knew the stairs. Darkness, for them, was not the end of ability. It was simply a room with the furniture in a familiar place. And where light had to be spent, it was pooled. All across the old countryside of Europe, there was a custom, so widespread that it had a different name in every region, of gathering the neighborhood into one room on winter evenings, around one fire and one or two lamps, to share the light and the warmth and the company all at once. In France they called such an evening the veillée. 10 or 15 people from 4 or 5 households would crowd into a single farmhouse kitchen, the women spinning and sewing, the men mending harness, the children playing quietly on the floor, and one candle would do the work of 5, and one fire would warm 5 families' worth of people, and the whole gathering paid for itself and saved tallow. But of course the saving was only half the point. These evenings were where the old stories got told, where the news traveled, where the young people did their courting under many watchful eyes, and where the whole village, in effect, tucked itself in together. When the candle finally guttered, everyone walked home through the dark to their separate cold houses and their warm beds, and the night absorbed them all. There was one great exception to the economy of light, one lamp that cost nothing and lit the whole world at once, and that was the moon. It is almost impossible for us to feel how important the moon was, because we have drowned it in streetlight, but for most of history the moon was infrastructure. When the moon was full, the night opened up. Roads became passable. Travel became safe, or at least sensible. Accounts from the period suggest that dinner parties, club meetings and country dances were deliberately scheduled for the nights around the full moon, so that guests could find their way home across the fields afterward. And there was at least one famous society of scientists and industrialists in Birmingham, men who would go on to help invent the modern world, who called themselves the Lunar Society, for the sensible reason that they met on the Monday nearest the full moon, when the writing was good. The frontier between light and dark ran on a 14-day cycle, and everyone in the town on our hill carried that calendar in their head, the way we carry weekends. On a moonless night, or a clouded one, the town went dark in a way that we would find astonishing. People stepped out their doors into blackness and navigated by memory, by the feel of the wall under one hand, by counting their paces, by the different sounds their boots made on cobbles and on packed earth. They knew their own houses in the dark the way you know your own bed in the dark, every stair, every latch, every low beam. There are letters from the period in which the writer mentions, entirely casually, walking a mile home from a neighbor's house in darkness so complete that they steered by the sound of a stream on their left and thought nothing of it. The dark was not an emergency. It was simply the second half of the world, the half you moved through slowly, with your hands out, unhurried. And so, let us go down the hill and into the town and watch it put itself to bed. Every house had its own version of the same closing ceremony, and it was performed every night of every year, in the same order, by the same hands, until it was as automatic as breathing. The English had a phrase for it. They called it shutting up the house, and it was usually the master's or the mistress's last office of the day, done by feel and long habit with a single candle carried from room to room. The shutters were folded across the windows and their iron bars dropped into place, as much against the cold as against anything else. The door was locked and then bolted, and in many houses a heavy wooden bar was lowered into iron brackets across it, a satisfying final thunk that meant the day was officially over. The fire was checked one last time, the fire guard set in front of it, and the hearth swept so that no stray ember could find anything to eat in the night, because in a world of thatch and timber, an untended fire was the one true terror of the dark, feared far more than any burglar. The cat was put out, or let in, according to the politics of the household. The clock was wound, its weights drawn up on their chains, so that the house's small heartbeat would not stop before morning. And in a great many homes there were evening prayers, brief and murmured, the whole household kneeling for a minute in the kitchen while the candle threw everyone's shadow up the wall, asking, in the old words, for protection through the perils and dangers of this night, which tells you gently just how large the night once loomed. Then the procession upstairs, eldest carrying the light. There are memoirs that describe this small nightly parade with great tenderness, the children going up first, the candle behind them throwing their shadows enormous on the staircase wall, the good night set on the landing, the doors closing one by one. The candle was set down, the clothes were folded onto the chest, and the last act of all, in bedroom after bedroom, all across the town, all across the century, was the same soft ceremony. A breath drawn in, a small lean toward the flame, and out. It is perhaps 9 o'clock. The last public light, the lantern over the inn door, has been taken in. In the houses along the high street, the evening's single candles are being snuffed, one by one, each little orange window going dark in its turn. In the kitchen of a bakery, a woman rakes the ashes over the coals of her fire, banking it exactly the way her grandmother taught her, so that tomorrow's fire will not have to be struck from cold flint. That banked fire is the household's pilot light, its one small ember of continuity, and covering it properly is the true last act of every day, older than the town itself. Up the stairs, in the darkness, Her family finds its way to bed by touch. A hand on the smooth rail. For steps, a turn, 3 more. The floorboard that creaks is stepped over without thought. The children are already down, 2 to a bed, warm as loaves. The shutters are drawn against the night air, which everyone agrees is unwholesome, and the house settles, timber by timber, tick by tick, into stillness. Outside, the town lies open to the sky, with no lamps to blind them. The stars come down close, thousands upon thousands of them. The great river of the Milky Way running right over the chimney tops, so bright and so ordinary that nobody remarks on it at all. A dog barks once, far off, and thinks better of it. The stream that turns the mill goes on murmuring to itself in the dark, as it has all day and will all night. Somewhere a shutter is latched. Somewhere a bolt slides home. And the last candle in the town, in the window of the doctor's house, where someone is sitting up with a patient, burns small and steady, the only star at ground level, until it too is blown out. The town has turned off, and nobody in it feels deprived, because this is simply what night is, and has always been, a deep, dark, quiet country that arrives every evening like a tide, and everyone knows how to float in it. The darkness is not empty. It is full of rest. Take one more slow look at it, from up here on the hill. The sleeping rooftops. The last thread of smoke from a banked fire, rising straight up into the still air. The enormous, patient sky. In a few stories' time, we will come back to a street very like this one and watch the first lamps arrive and the long reign of this darkness begin to end. But that is a while away yet, and there is no hurry at all. For now, let the little town sleep. Let your breathing slow to match it, and let the darkness be what it was for all those centuries, not an absence, but a blanket. Because our next story is already waiting, far from here, out where there are no hills and no towns and no candles at all, only water in every direction, and a wooden ship leaning along under the same crowded stars, full of sleeping sailors swinging gently in their hammocks. Let the tide carry us out to them now, slowly, and we will see how the sea rocked its people to sleep. Our second story takes place far from any town, any candle, any hill. Picture the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, sometime around the year 1790, on a clear, mild night with a steady following wind. There is a ship out here, a wooden ship of the old kind, perhaps 150 feet long, leaning gently along under a tower of pale sails. From a distance, she is silent. Up close, she is a whole world of small sounds. And somewhere inside her wooden walls, 300 men are fast asleep, swinging softly from the beams in rows of canvas hammocks, rocked by the same ocean that is carrying them across the world. Tonight we are going aboard, to discover how sailors slept at sea, and why some of them, at the end of long lives, swore they never again slept so well on land. Begin with the hammock itself, because the hammock is a gift, and like many of the best gifts, Europe did not invent it. When the first Spanish ships reached the islands of the Caribbean at the end of the 1400s, the sailors noticed that the Taino people slept in woven beds of cotton netting, slung between 2 trees, cool and dry and up off the ground away from the damp and the crawling things. The Taino word for these beds, hammoca, slid straight into Spanish, and then into every language of Europe, and the object itself slid just as smoothly into the one place in the world that needed it most desperately, the crowded, rolling, dripping lower deck of a wooden ship. To understand why the hammock conquered the sea, you have to understand what it replaced. Before hammocks, sailors slept where they could, on the bare deck planks, on coils of rope, in narrow wooden bunks built against the ship's side. And every one of those arrangements shared the same fundamental problem, which is that a ship never holds still. A ship rolls, all night, every night. She leans slowly one way, pauses, and leans slowly back the other way, over and over, forever. A man lying on a plank rolls with her, sliding and bracing and waking all night long. A man in a rigid bunk is pressed first against one board, then against the other, like cargo shifting in a crate. But a man in a hammock hangs from two fixed points, and so, while the whole ship rolls around him, he and his hammock simply stay put, swinging gently beneath the beams like a pendulum at rest. The ship does the moving. The sleeper does not. Sailors discovered, within a generation, that this made the hammock very possibly the most comfortable bed in the world, a bed that not only tolerated the ocean's motion, but transformed it into a slow, endless, effortless rocking, the exact motion, as many a sailor observed, with which a mother rocks a cradle. The sea, which took so much from these men, gave them this one thing back. It rocked them to sleep every single night. Now come below decks and see where all this sleeping happened, because the accommodations were, to put it gently, cozy. On a warship of the period, the crew slept on the lower deck, a single long wooden room running most of the length of the ship, with headroom so low that a tall man could not stand upright, and the great curved beams of the deck above brushing his hair. From those beams hung rows of iron hooks, and from those hooks, each evening, the hammocks were slung, hundreds of them, in ranks and files as orderly as a plowed field. Regulations of the British Navy allowed each man a width of 14 inches for his hammock. 14 inches. That is less than the width of this pillow. In practice, it was a little better than it sounds, because the crew was divided into two watches, and at any given hour half the men were on duty up on deck, which meant their neighbors could spread into the vacant space, giving each sleeper a princely 28 inches. Even so, the lower deck at night was simply a solid field of slung canvas, swaying all together, touching at the shoulders, packed as close as cocoons in some enormous wooden chrysalis, warm with the heat of hundreds of sleepers, and swinging, all of them, gently, in unison, with every slow roll of the ship. You might imagine that nobody could sleep in such a place, and you would be wrong, because the men who slept there were among the most reliably, promptly, deeply asleep human beings in history, and the reason was the watch system, which is our next discovery, and which is really a story about what happens to sleep when it is rationed as strictly as candlelight. A sailing ship works around the clock, and so her crew was divided, from time immemorial, into two watches, which took turns running the ship in shifts of 4 hours. For hours on duty, for hours off, around and around, day and night, for the entire voyage, which might be months or years. The ship's bell kept the schedule, rung every half hour, 1 bell, 2 bells, up to 8 bells, at which the watches changed. When 8 bells struck, half the crew came pouring down the hatchways, peeled off their wet jackets, and were asleep, by every account, within minutes, sometimes within seconds. And 4 hours later, the boatswain's mates came along the rows of hammocks with the traditional cry of all the watch below, out or down, and those same men rolled out, instantly awake, and went up into the wind, while the other half of the crew came down and dropped into the warm hammocks they had just left. Accounts suggest that sailors became, in effect, professional sleepers. They slept immediately, anywhere, in any weather, through any noise except the one noise that concerned them. And this is one of the small marvels of the sleeping mind that the old sea life reveals. A sailor slept soundly through the groan of timbers, the roar of water along the hull, the thunder of feet on the deck directly above his face, the snoring of 300 neighbors. But the particular call that meant his own watch was wanted, or the particular change in the ship's motion that meant trouble, would have him awake and moving before he knew why. The mind, it turns out, does not switch off in sleep. It stands its own quiet watch, sorting every sound, waking us only for the ones that matter. Sailors trusted that inner sentry completely, and so they could hand themselves over to sleep the moment they lay down, the way a man hands his coat to a servant, entirely, without a second thought. And the sounds that sentry ignored were, if we are honest, some of the finest sleeping sounds ever assembled in one place. A wooden ship underway is never silent and never harsh. She creaks everywhere and continuously, hundreds of joints and knees and planks all easing and settling against each other with every roll, a sound like a vast old house breathing. The water runs along her sides, a foot from the sleeper's ear, in a long, unbroken rush, rising a little as she surges, easing as she settles. The rigging hums one low note in a steady wind. The bell arrives every half hour, small and silver and far away. Wind, water, timber, bell. Men who spent 30 years falling asleep inside that sound found ordinary beds ashore, in ordinary silent houses, almost unbearable, and the memoirs of old sailors are full of confessions that they missed it all their lives, and that no bedroom ever felt as safe as a hammock among 300 shipmates, swinging over the sea. The hammock, by the way, did not spend its days hanging idle below. Every morning, at the pipe of the boatswain's whistle, each man rolled out, lashed his hammock into a tight sausage with exactly 7 turns of cord, 7 being the regulation number, and woe to the man whose lashing was slack, and carried it up on deck, where the whole crew's bedding was stowed side by side in the netting racks along the ship's rails. This was partly about airing the bedding, and partly about tidiness, because the lower deck by day became the crew's dining room and workshop and had no room for 400 hanging beds. But it had a third purpose, and it is one of those details that tells you everything about the age. In battle, that tight-packed wall of rolled hammocks along the rails served as armor. A well-lashed hammock, dense with blanket and canvas, would slow or stop a musket ball, and so the men, quite literally, sheltered behind their own beds, and their beds protected them by day as faithfully as they carried them by night. It is hard to think of another bed in history that did both. While the crew swung in their canvas field, the officers slept differently, and not, it must be said, always better. The captain had the great cabin at the stern, with its sweep of windows over the ship's wake, and in it, in most ships, a swinging cot, which was a shallow wooden box, like a well-made crib, slung from the deck head by ropes at each corner, so that it, too, hung level while the ship rolled. It had a proper mattress, proper sheets, sometimes curtains. It was, by the standards of the sea, luxury. And yet the memoirs of captains are full of bad nights, because the captain's sleep carried a weight the crew's did not. Every change of wind was his problem. Every strange sail on the horizon was his problem. He was woken, by standing order, for anything the officer of the watch was unsure about, and captains of a certain temperament slept, as one of them put it, with one ear ashore and one ear aloft, year after year, alone in their fine wide cots, in the only private room on the ship, while 300 men slept like stones 100 feet away, precisely because none of it was their problem. There is a small lesson about sleep folded into that arrangement, and it has not changed in 200 years. Comfort helps, but an untroubled mind helps more, and the man with the narrowest bed and the clearest conscience sleeps best of all. The crew also had one more sleeping institution, unofficial but universal, and it deserves its moment. Sailors called it caulking. To caulk, in the proper sense, is to seal a ship's seams, which was done by men lying full length on the deck, and at some point in the age of sail the word slid sideways into meaning a nap taken flat on the deck in the sun, on the perfectly reasonable grounds that a man doing that looked exactly like a man caulking, minus the tools. On a fine afternoon in the trades, in the off-watch, men caulked in rows in the shade of the sails, hats over their faces, heads pillowed on a coil of rope, the deck warm as a hearthstone under them, and officers, who had after all been young once, made a point of not noticing. For hours on and 4 hours off is a hard rhythm, and the wise ship let her people patch their sleep wherever they could, the way a household patched its candle ends. Sleep at sea was like light ashore. It was precious, it was rationed, none of it was wasted, and every scrap was gathered up. There were, of course, less comfortable nights, and honesty compels us to at least glance at them. There were nights of storm when nobody slept, when both watches were on deck for hours, and men came below soaked through to find their hammocks swinging wildly in the dark. There were tropical nights in harbor when the lower deck was breathless and men slept on the open deck under the stars instead, which most of them privately preferred anyway. But the ordinary night at sea, the trade wind night, of which a long voyage might contain hundreds on end, was exactly the night we have been describing, steady, warm, crowded, creaking, and profoundly restful, for hours at a time. One more picture, and then we will let the ship sail on without us. It is the middle watch, the deep of the night. On deck, under the enormous sky, a few dozen men stand their duty quietly, the helmsman's face lit faintly from the compass lamp, the officer pacing slowly, the lookouts draped in the rigging, everyone speaking in low voices, because night on a ship has its own etiquette, and loud talk is for the day. Below their feet, through 6 inches of oak, their 300 shipmates hang sleeping in the dark in their long swaying rows, breathing all together, rocked all together, carried along at 8 miles an hour, a village asleep in a wooden shell in the middle of an ocean 3 miles deep, under more stars than any of us will ever see. The bell strikes, twice, softly, 2 bells of the middle watch, which is to say, 1 o'clock in the morning, and all is well. Let the ship go on ahead of us now. Let her creak and hum and dwindle away over the curve of the dark water, carrying her sleeping village with her, and let the rocking she gave us settle into your own bed here. That slow lean one way, that patient lean back. Because our next story is waiting somewhere much colder, far to the north, where the snow is falling past a small window, and an entire family is climbing, one by one, into a bed with wooden doors and shutting the winter out. From the middle of a warm ocean, our third story carries us north, a long way north, to the countryside of Scotland and the Netherlands and Scandinavia, in the depths of winter, in the centuries when the only heat a house contained was the heat somebody had carried into it as firewood. It is snowing where we are going. It has been snowing, on and off, for days. And the question this story asks is a simple one. A question you can feel in your own warm bed right now. In a stone cottage, in a world without furnaces, without radiators, without electric blankets, in a winter that lasted 5 months, how did anyone ever sleep warm? The answer is that the old world, given 1,000 years to think about it, solved winter the way it solved everything else, patiently, cleverly, and together, and its solutions were so good that some of them are quietly coming back into fashion today. Begin with the most charming of them all, the box bed. Across the cold rim of northern Europe, from Brittany up through the Netherlands and Denmark and into Scotland and Norway, a great many households did not have a bed standing openly in a room. They had a bed built into the wall, a wooden cabinet the size of a large wardrobe, with a mattress inside, and doors. Solid wooden doors, or sliding panels, or heavy curtains, which the sleepers closed behind them when they climbed in. Think about what that means. The bed was a room within a room, exactly as the curtained great bed of the castle was, but humbler and even more effective. A cottage's single fire, banked for the night, could not hope to keep the whole house warm until morning. The temperature in the kitchen, by the small hours of a hard frost, sank toward the temperature outside, and there are winter memoirs that mention, without drama, the water jug skinned with ice on the washstand and frost ferns on the inside of the window glass. But inside the box bed, with the doors drawn shut, the 2 or 3 sleepers packed together under their blankets had a space no bigger than a wagon to heat, and their own bodies heated it. Within half an hour of climbing in, the box was warm. By midnight it was snug. The wooden walls held the warmth in and the drafts out, absolutely, in a way no open bed could, and the household slept, in effect, in a row of small wooden ships, sealed and warm, while winter owned the rest of the house. Accounts suggest the box bed had other virtues too. In the crowded single-room cottages of the age, its doors gave the married couple the only privacy the house contained. Its top served as a shelf, sometimes as a second sleeping platform for a child. In the Netherlands, where the box beds were often built quite short, people slept propped half upright on pillows, which physicians of the day recommended anyway. And children raised in box beds, the record suggests, loved them all their lives, the way one loves a treehouse or a ship's cabin, and found open bedrooms faintly alarming when they first met them. All that unenclosed air, all that room for the night to stand around the bed and look at you. A box bed put wooden arms around the sleeper. It was furniture as embrace, and nobody who slept in one ever had to be told that a smaller, closer, darker space is very often an easier place to fall asleep, a thing the makers of modern sleep pods and canopy beds have spent a great deal of money rediscovering. If the box bed was the North's answer to the cold room, the warming pan was its answer to the cold mattress. And the warming pan deserves its own affectionate paragraph, because for about 4 centuries, it was the last comfort of the day in half the households of Europe. It was a broad, shallow, lidded pan of brass or copper, the size of a dinner plate and the depth of your hand, on a long wooden handle, and it hung by the kitchen hearth all day like a household saint. At bedtime, someone, and in the family hierarchy, it was usually the youngest person still awake, raked a few glowing coals from the banked fire into the pan, closed the lid, and carried it upstairs ahead of the sleepers. Then, bed by bed, the pan was slid between the sheets and moved slowly about, up and down, side to side, the way you iron a shirt, until the linen was warm all through. The sheets in an unheated bedroom in January were not merely cool, they were damp cold, cold enough to shock the breath out of you. And the difference between climbing into that and climbing into a bed freshly stroked with a warming pan was the difference between misery and luxury. Children fought over whose bed was warmed first. The pan hissed faintly as it traveled, the bed smelled briefly of toasted linen, and the whole operation, done nightly, in the dark, by candlelight, was as close to a sacrament as housework ever came. Poorer households, and thriftier ones, managed the same trick without the brass. A brick or a smooth flat stone went into the oven or onto the hearth after supper, and at bedtime it was wrapped in flannel and carried up, and a hot wrapped brick tucked by your feet stays warm, as anyone who has tried it knows, deep into the night. In parts of the countryside this remained ordinary practice within living memory, and its descendant, the rubber hot water bottle, is simply the same idea with the fire taken out. Some houses kept a special smooth oval stone for each member of the family, worn silky with generations of flannel, and there is something quietly lovely about that. A family's stones warming in a row on the hearth every winter evening, each one bound for its own particular bed. And then there was the oldest heating system of all, older than bricks, older than brass, which was other people. We touched on this in the castle, on another night, and it was nowhere more true than in winter. Cold weather packed households together. Children who had scattered to their own corners in summer consolidated, 2 and 3 to a bed when the frosts came. Servants doubled up. The spare room was abandoned, and everyone drew in toward the kitchen, the one fire, the shared warmth, like a camp drawing in around its fire. A bed with 2 sleepers in it, under the same weight of blankets, is measurably, meaningfully warmer than a bed with 1, and the old world knew it and arranged itself accordingly, without embarrassment, all winter long. And on the coldest nights of all, the animals contributed. In the longhouse pattern of farm building, common for centuries across the north, the family lived at one end of the building and the cattle were byred at the other, under the same long roof, sometimes with no more than a partition between, and the animals' great slow warmth drifted through the whole house all night, a living furnace that also, occasionally, glowed in its sleep. People raised in such houses wrote, later, that the sound of the beasts shifting and breathing on the other side of the wall was among the safest sounds they ever knew. The whole farm, human and animal together, was one warm-blooded thing, riding out the winter under one roof. Further east, where the winters grew truly serious, people stopped merely warming the bed and did something more radical. They merged the bed with the stove. In the villages of old Russia, the heart of every cottage was the pesh, an enormous masonry stove, a whitewashed mountain of brick that could fill a quarter of the house, used for heating and baking and everything else, and its genius was its mass. Fired once or twice a day, all those tons of bricks soaked up the heat and then released it slowly, evenly, hour after hour, staying warm from one firing to the next. And the top of the stove, a broad flat platform up near the ceiling where the warmth gathered, was the best bed in the house. It even had a name, the Lazanka, the lying place. By right and by custom it belonged to the grandparents, whose old bones had earned it, and to the smallest children, who curled up there like cats, and on the coldest nights of all, accounts suggest, the whole family might end up arranged across the great warm back of the stove in order of seniority, sleeping on gentle heat the way other households slept on feathers. Travelers who spent a night on a Russian stove tended to write about it for the rest of their lives. And on the other side of the same great landmass, northern China solved the same winter with the same idea turned sideways. The Kong was a wide platform of brick or dried earth, hip-high, running along one whole wall of the room, and it was hollow. The flues from the cooking fire ran through it, under the sleeping surface, on their way to the chimney, so that every meal cooked in the house sent its heat winding through the family's bed. By night, spread with felts and quilts, the Kong was the warm heart of the household. Bed and sofa and dining platform and workbench all in one, where the family ate, sewed, received guests, and finally slept, all together on the gentle stored warmth of their own supper fire. Kong beds have been found by archaeologists reaching back thousands of years, and in parts of the North Chinese countryside they were still being warmed within living memory, which makes the Kong very possibly the longest-serving bed design in the history of the world. 2 continents, 1 discovery, arrived at from opposite directions. Do not fight the winter with blankets alone. Put the fire itself to bed and lie down on its back. Above all of them, human and beast alike, lay the bedding, and northern bedding was a science of its own. Linen sheets against the skin, because linen warms quickly. Wool blankets above, as many as the household owned, because wool holds warmth even when damp. And over everything, in the lands that had geese, the crowning glory, the feather bed used not as mattress but as cover, the ancestor of the duvet, a vast, light, billowing quilt of down under which a sleeper lay as if under a warm snowdrift, which is a pleasing symmetry, snow above the roof, snow-soft warmth above the sleeper, and the sleeper snug between. In Norway and Denmark the down of the eider duck, gathered gently from nests along the fjords, made the lightest and warmest quilts in the world, so prized that eider colonies were protected and tended like orchards, and a good eider down passed from mother to daughter for generations, growing softer with every decade of nights. So now, let us put the whole apparatus together and spend the night we came here to spend. It is a January evening in a farmhouse in the Scottish lowlands, some 250 years ago. Outside, the snow has stopped, the sky has cleared, and the cold has come down like a lid. The byre end of the house is closed up, the cattle fed, their warmth already seeping through the partition wall. In the kitchen, the peat fire is smowered, which is the Scots word for banked, the glowing turfs buried under ash in the ritual pattern, and the old grandmother murmurs the smouring blessing over it as her mother did, asking that the fire be kept, as the household is kept, until morning. The warming pan has made its rounds. The stones are wrapped and distributed. The youngest children are already in the wall bed they share, a warm tangle under the wool, their whispering winding down. The doors of the beds slide shut, one by one, along the wall, each with its soft wooden knock, until the kitchen stands empty in the last red light of the smowered fire, the whole family folded away into the walls of their own house, like letters into envelopes. And in the morning, here is the wonder of it, they will wake warm. The kitchen will be bitter, the water jug will be ice, the window will be furred with frost flowers, and inside each closed wooden box, the sleepers will lie in a nest of their own accumulated warmth, wool and feathers and family, entirely comfortable, listening to the first sounds of the fire being uncovered, and reluctant, deliciously, luxuriously reluctant, to open the doors. That reluctance, at least, has come down to us completely intact. Every one of us knows the warm bed cold room feeling, the sweetness of the last 5 minutes under the covers. Theirs was simply deeper, because their cold was colder and their warmth was harder won. You are lying, right now, in the soft descendant of everything in this story, the duvet, the warmed bed, the enclosed dark, and you may keep all of it without the frost. Pull the covers a little higher, by way of gratitude to the box beds and the warming pans and the wrapped stones, and let the snow of that old January fall gently over the whole story, hushing it, whitening it, tucking it in. And when it has fallen deep enough, we will slip away south again, to a gentler question and a softer subject, because having discovered where people slept and how they kept warm, there remains the small, comfortable matter of what, exactly, everybody was wearing. The history of the nightcap and the nightgown is waiting for us, and it is exactly as cozy as it sounds. There is no hurry at all. The stones are warm. The doors are shut. The snow is falling on the roof of the world, and everyone beneath it is asleep. Our fourth story is the gentlest kind of history there is, the history of comfortable clothes. Whatever you are wearing right now as you listen, an old t-shirt, proper pajamas, a nightgown, or simply the blankets themselves, you are wearing the latest chapter in a very long, very soft story. And tonight we are going to unfold it slowly, garment by garment, the whole drowsy wardrobe of the sleeping world, from the nightshirt to the nightcap to the surprisingly well-traveled pajama, which came to your bedroom, as we shall see. All the way from the east, along the same roads our next story will follow into the desert. Begin at the beginning, which is to say, begin with nothing at all. Through most of the Middle Ages, the ordinary answer to the question of what to wear to bed was simple. You wore what you were already wearing underneath everything else, or you wore nothing whatsoever. Both were completely respectable. The universal undergarment of the age was a long, loose shirt of linen, called a shirt for men and a smock or chemise for women, and it was the garment that lived closest to the skin, day and night. A person of the 14th century dressed in layers, wool over linen, and at night the wool came off and the linen stayed on, and that was bedtime, fully achieved. The linen shirt was, in effect, the first pajama, and it held the job for about 500 years. There was a sound reason it was always linen, and the reason is worth a moment, because it explains half the laundry habits of the old world. Linen, woven from flax, is soft against the skin, it breathes, and above all it washes well and whitens in the sun. Wool was the outside of a person, linen was the inside, and while the wool might go years without washing, the linen was changed and boiled and bleached as often as the household could manage. Clean linen was cleanliness itself. In centuries when a full bath was a production involving fires and kettles and a wooden tub, the daily or weekly change into fresh linen was how a body stayed decent, the shirt drinking up the day the way a towel drinks up water, and carrying it off to the wash house. So the garment you slept in was also, quite literally, part of your plumbing. It was doing hygienic work all night long, and a household supply of good linen shirts and smocks, hemmed and mended and handed down, was counted among its solid wealth, listed in wills right alongside the beds. By the 16th and 17th centuries, the well-off had begun to keep a separate, special shirt just for sleeping, longer, fuller, warmer, and the nightshirt proper was born, that ankle-length, wide-sleeved, forgiving garment that every illustration of the old world's bedtime shows, from Scrooge on his cold stairs to wee Willie Winky running through the town. For women, the night smock grew likewise into the nightgown. These were not glamorous objects. They were vast and plain and practical, cut like sails, warm as tents, easy to make and easy to mend, and people loved them the way people have always loved their oldest, softest clothes. Among the wealthy, they could become splendid, embroidered at the cuffs and throat, trimmed with lace, and there are royal inventories listing nightshirts of such fineness that they were clearly meant to be seen by visitors, because a king in the old world, as we have learned on other nights, was rarely entirely alone, even at bedtime. But for everyone else, the nightshirt was simply comfort, institutionalized. A person stepped out of the day, dropped that soft white tint over their head, and was, by that one motion, officially finished with the world until morning. And then, above the nightshirt, came the crowning glory of old-fashioned sleep, the garment this channel is practically sworn to honor, the nightcap. It is easy to laugh at the nightcap, the long droopy cone with the tassel on the end, and people laughed at it even while wearing it. But the nightcap earned its 5 centuries of service, and here is why. The bedrooms of the old world, as our box bed story made thoroughly clear, were cold, and a great deal of a sleeping body's heat drifts away from the head, the one part of the sleeper that blankets do not cover. A snug wool or cotton cap held that warmth in, plain and simple, and on a January night in an unheated room, the difference was not small. The cap had secondary duties too. In the powdered wig centuries, many men kept their heads shaved and were sincerely bald under all that borrowed hair, and the nightcap kept a shaved head warm and a wigless dignity intact. For women, the night coif protected elaborate hair that might have taken hours to dress, and kept the pillow clean, and kept the hair from tangling, all at once. And the classic tasseled shape, accounts suggest, was not pure whimsy either. A long cap could be wound once around the neck like a small scarf, and the tassel gave the sleeper something to find it by when it wandered in the night, and perhaps, as some claim, it simply looked cheerful, and there are worse reasons for a fashion to survive 400 years. Whole trades existed to knit them. Sober merchants ordered them by the dozen. And the image of the old world going to bed, the candle, the long shirt, the tasseled cap, is so deeply lodged in our common memory that our own sleepy historian wears one on his crest and will not be giving it up. Between the day and the night, meanwhile, there evolved a garment for the border hours, and it tells a story about where comfort itself was imported from. In the later 1600s, gentlemen of Europe took up a loose, flowing robe to wear at home in the evenings, over the shirt, once the stiff coat of the day was hung up. The English called it a banyan, borrowing the name from India, or sometimes simply a nightgown, and its cut and its silks and its printed cottons came, unmistakably, from the East, from the wide, comfortable clothing of India and Persia, and, before long, the imported dressing gowns of Japan. To sit by one's fire in a banyan and cap, book in hand, was the very picture of an easy evening, and gentlemen were so fond of the look that many had their portraits painted in it, choosing, for the image that would outlive them, not their armor and not their velvet court coat, but their most comfortable robe, which tells you something rather warm about human beings. The banyan is the direct ancestor of the dressing gown and the bathrobe on the back of your bedroom door, and it was Europe's first great lesson in a truth the East had known for centuries, that clothes for resting in are their own art and worth perfecting. The second great lesson arrived in the 19th century, and it conquered the world. In India and Persia there had been, since long before any European ships arrived, a garment of perfect sense, loose light trousers of cotton or silk, drawn at the waist with a cord. The Hindi and Urdu name for them, borrowed from Persian, was pajama, which means, more or less, leg garment, and they were worn by men and women alike as ordinary comfortable daily dress. British men stationed in India in the 1800s discovered them, adopted them for lounging and for sleeping, discovered also that they had no intention of ever giving them up, and carried them home. By the end of the century, the tailors of London were selling pajama suits, the drawstring trousers now paired with a soft button jacket. And within a generation, the pajama had done what fashion rarely manages. It retired a 500-year incumbent. The ancient nightshirt, that noble tent, slowly gave ground through the early 20th century, and the pajama took its place across half the world, so that today, when you fold back your covers, the odds are good that you are climbing into bed dressed, in name and in design, in a garment of the Mughal East, softened by 2 centuries of translation. The word itself made the whole journey, Persia to India to London to everywhere, growing more comfortable at every stage. And it may be the only word in this story that has been worn out by 4 continents and is still going strong. It is worth pausing, before we leave the wardrobe, on the sheer ceremony of getting undressed in the old world, because for a large part of history, going to bed was not a matter of kicking off 2 shoes and pulling a shirt over your head. Daytime clothes, for anyone above the plainest station, were engineering. They laced, they pinned, they buttoned in long, inaccessible rows. They hooked and tied and stiffened, and a fashionable person of the 17th or 18th century could no more undress alone than a knight could unbolt his own armor. And so the last hour of the day, in prosperous houses, had its own quiet choreography. The gentleman's valet unpinned, unbuttoned, and brushed, received the coat and waistcoat, and handed over the nightshirt, warmed at the fire. The lady's maid unlaced the stays, that firm architecture the body had lived inside since morning, drew out the pins, some evenings dozens of them, brushed out and braided the hair for the night, and lifted the day's whole structure away, layer by layer, until her mistress stood at last in plain soft linen, simply a person again. People of that world wrote about the moment of unlacing the way we might write about the first step into a hot bath, the day's pressure releasing all at once, the deep breath the stays had been rationing since breakfast finally arriving whole. Getting into a nightshirt was not just a change of clothes. It was the changing of a state, from public to private, from held to unheld, performed nightly, with help, by candlelight. And it may be that nobody in history has ever appreciated comfortable clothes quite as intensely as the people who spent all day in uncomfortable ones. And at the bottom of the whole arrangement, literally, were the feet, which the old world took very seriously indeed, because cold floors were universal and cold feet, then as now, will keep a body awake long after everything else is warm. Bed socks, thick, loose, knitted for the purpose, were an ordinary comfort for centuries, recommended by physicians and grandmothers with equal confidence, and in the coldest countries they were sheepskin, fleece side-in. The bedside slipper earned its permanent post beside every bed of the old world for the same reason, waiting like a small, faithful boat for the moment its owner had to cross the freezing floor in the dark. There is a whole minor literature of advice, stretching from the ancient physicians to the Victorians, on the single subject of keeping the feet warm at night, and its conclusion, reached again and again in every century, is the one your own body already knows. Warm the feet, and sleep follows them up the whole length of the sleeper, like a tide coming in. Women's nightwear traveled its own quieter road through those same centuries, from the plain smock to the Victorian nightgown, that high-necked, long-sleeved, ankle-length flannel institution, warm as a hug and roomy as charity, and onward, in the 20th century, into every possibility from silk to winceyette. But the deep design never changed, and it has never changed since the first linen smock. Loose, soft, breathing, nothing that binds, nothing that rustles, nothing that reminds the body of the working day. Every culture that has ever thought about sleep has arrived at the same quiet conclusion, that the clothes of the night should ask nothing of the wearer at all. So take a moment, wherever you are, to notice what you are wearing and to feel the whole soft procession standing behind it. The linen smock, boiled white in 100 washhouses. The great tint of the nightshirt. The tasseled cap, keeping 5 centuries of heads warm in 5 centuries of cold rooms. The silk banyan by the evening fire. The pajama, riding home from India in a soldier's trunk. All of it worn by people exactly as tired as you are now. All of it perfected, stitch by stitch, for the single purpose of making the night easier, and all of it leading, garment by garment, generation by generation, to whatever softness you are lying in at this moment. You are the current keeper of a very old comfort. It suits you. And since the pajama has shown us the road, let us follow it. Back along the sea lanes, back through the bazaars, back east along the caravan roads, to the source of so much of the world's silk and cotton and comfort, because night is falling now on a high desert plain in Central Asia 700 years ago, and out of the dusk, swaying and jingling, a caravan is coming in off the Silk Road, 100 camels long, looking for the one thing every traveler in every century has looked for at sunset: a safe place to sleep. The gates of the caravanserai are open, and the fires are lit, and they are expecting us. Our fifth story finds us standing on a high desert plain in Central Asia, somewhere along the Great Road between Samarkand and the West, on an evening in the 1300s. The sun has just gone down behind mountains the color of a lion's back. The sky in the west is a deep, dusty rose, and the first hard white stars are already out in the east, because night comes quickly in this country, and it comes cold. Sound carries a long way here, and the sound that carries now, from far down the road, is one of the great sounds of the old world, a sound that meant safety and supper and sleep to 1,000 years of tired travelers. Camel bells. A caravan is coming in. You can see it now, a long dark line swaying out of the dusk. 80, 90, 100 camels, roped nose to tail in strings, each one carrying a quarter-ton of the world's goods, silk and porcelain heading west, glass and silver and wool heading east, and on top of the loads, or walking alongside with their long shadows, the merchants and drivers and grooms of half a dozen nations, dusty to the eyebrows, thinking about exactly one thing. The same thing every traveler on every road has thought about at sunset since roads began. Where do we sleep tonight? And here, on this road, in this century, the answer is standing right in front of us, and it is one of the most quietly wonderful buildings human beings ever learned to make. It is called a caravanserai. From the outside, it looks like a small fortress, a great square of high blank walls, 100 paces on a side, the color of the desert itself, with a single gate, one arched doorway, tall enough and wide enough for a loaded camel. And that lone gate is the whole point of the architecture. One way in, one way out. Walls too high to climb, with no other opening but slits. In the empty country between cities, where the road belonged to whoever was on it and the night belonged to no one at all, the caravanserai was a box of safety set down in the wilderness, and the rule of the road, kept for 1,000 years across 30 degrees of longitude, was that the gate stood open until the last light, and then it was shut and barred and did not open again until dawn, exactly as the castle gate was shut, exactly as the town gate was shut, because the old world, wherever you went, put itself nightly into a locked box and slept better for it. These buildings were everywhere. That is the astonishing thing. Along the great roads of Persia and Central Asia and Anatolia, the caravanserais were spaced, by long custom and sometimes by royal decree, roughly one day's caravan travel apart, 20 miles, 25, so that a merchant train setting out at dawn would raise the next one's walls against the sunset, day after day, stage after stage, all the way across a continent. Kings and sultans built them by the hundred, as acts of piety and good business at once. And some were plain and some were palaces, with carved gates like cathedral doors, but the plan inside was always, comfortingly, the same. Through the one gate, and you stood in a great open courtyard, the evening sky overhead, a well or a fountain in the middle, and around all four sides, in the thickness of the walls, arcade after arcade, bay after bay, the traveler's world in miniature. Stabling for the camels and horses at ground level. Storerooms for the precious loads, with doors that locked. And upstairs, or tucked behind the arcades, the small plain sleeping cells, each with its niche for a lamp, its hook for a cloak, its patch of floor for a bedroll, monks simple and utterly sufficient. Watch the caravan come in, because the next hour is a whole civilization in motion. The camels sway through the gate in their strings, groaning and complaining the way camels have always groaned and complained about absolutely everything, and are led to their places under the arcades. The unloading is fast and practiced. Every bale and chest swung down and carried to the storerooms, tallied by the caravan master, locked behind iron-bound doors. The animals are watered at the trough by the well, fed, rubbed down, and settled, and they fold themselves down onto their folded legs in that slow camel way, like ships going aground on purpose, and begin their long nighttime cud chewing, a sound like patient millstones that will run under the whole night. The dust of the road is washed off at the well, faces and hands and beards, and by full dark, the courtyard has bloomed with small fires, one to each traveling company, rings of firelight along the arcades, and the smell of wood smoke and bread and stewed mutton rises into the enormous starry sky, inside the locked walls, in the middle of the empty desert, and the caravanserai does its nightly miracle. It turns a stretch of dangerous nowhere into a village, for one night only, assembled at dusk and dissolved at dawn. Supper around the fires was the sociable hour, and the accounts that survive, from merchants and pilgrims and wandering scholars who slept in these places, all remember the same things about it. The mix of languages, Persian and Turkic and Arabic and Chinese trading words, all around the same flames. The news of the road passing from company to company, which passes were snowed shut, which river was in flood, what the tolls were doing this year, which stretch had bandits. Road intelligence traded as seriously as silk, because out here, information was survival. The traveling entertainers who might be sheltering that night too, and would sing for their supper. The tea, endless tea. And then, not late, because dawn on the road comes early, the fires burning down, the companies drifting off arcade by arcade, the lamps in the little wall niches going out one by one around the courtyard, like the town windows we watched from the hill, 2 stories and 3,000 miles ago. A word, too, about what all this hospitality cost, because the answer is one of the loveliest facts in the whole history of travel. In many of the great caravanserais of the Seljuk and Ottoman centuries, especially the royal ones along the main roads of Anatolia, the answer was nothing. Nothing at all. These houses were founded as waqf, as charitable endowments, funded forever by the rents of farms and shops deeded to them by their royal or wealthy builders, and their founding documents, many of which survive, spell out the traveler's rights in careful legal prose that reads, 7 centuries later, like a lullaby of its own. Every traveler, of every faith and station, to be received. Shelter for the customary 3 days, without payment. Bread and hot food from the kitchen, without payment. Fodder for the animals, care for the sick, and in some houses, by explicit clause, repairs to the poor traveler's shoes, without payment, because a man cannot walk out of the desert on broken shoes. The founders built these places the way other ages built cathedrals, as their bid to be remembered kindly by heaven, and the result was that a merchant could cross the width of an empire, night by night, gate by gate, on the road safety equivalent of a standing invitation. There has perhaps never been, before or since, a better deal offered to a tired human being at sunset. The empires had their reasons beyond piety, of course. Roads that are safe to sleep on are roads that carry trade, and trade could be taxed. And every ruler from the Seljuks to the great Khans understood that a chain of safe nights was worth more than a chest of jewels. The Mongols, in their vast century, ran the idea to its logical extreme with the yam, the imperial relay system, a network of posts spaced a hard day's ride apart across the whole width of Asia, thousands of stations, remounts and beds and rations standing ready from the Black Sea to China, so that an imperial messenger could hand himself along the chain, sleeping in a fresh post every night, and cross the known world in weeks. Marco Polo, who slept his way along those roads in the 1200s, wrote about the post houses with the plain astonishment of a man describing something his home continent could not yet imagine: fine beds and all things needful, he said, standing ready in the middle of nowhere for whoever the road brought in. Travelers' accounts across 5 centuries, Persian, Arab, Chinese, Venetian, all strike the same note when they come to the subject of these desert inns, and the note is relief. You can hear it under the ink. Whatever else the day had been, the rider had slept behind walls and been fed, and his animals were safe, and so the next morning had been possible. Civilization, on the old roads, was not a city. It was a chain of safe nights, and every link held. And now the caravanserai at midnight, which is the picture I most want to leave you with. The gate barred, the gatekeeper drowsing in his alcove beside it, wrapped in his cloak. The courtyard silver under the stars, and such stars, the high desert sky of Central Asia, moonless and lampless, the whole slow wheel of heaven turning over the sleeping square, bright enough to throw faint shadows. Around the arcades, the banked embers of a dozen fires breathing their last warmth. The camels in their rows, kneeling shadows, chewing, sighing, occasionally gurgling some private camel opinion into the dark. A horse shifting its feet on stone, somewhere. From the sleeping cells, the long soft polyphony of tired men, snoring gently in 6 languages. And on the roofs of their cells, in the hot months, more sleepers still, stretched out under the open sky the way people have always slept on roofs in hot countries, blanket-wrapped rows of them, faces to the stars, riding the cooling night. A merchant of that age, lying on such a roof, propped on one elbow for a last look before sleep, would have seen the road he came in by running out silver toward the horizon, and the road he would take tomorrow running out silver the other way, and the walls holding him safely between the two. One paid night of perfect safety between 2 days of open country. Small wonder that travelers wrote of these places with such affection. The caravanserai sold the most valuable commodity on any road in any century. Not the stabling, not the storerooms, not the tea. An untroubled night, a locked gate between you and everything, and permission, until dawn, to stop watching the horizon. The centuries took the caravans, in the end. The sea routes took the silk, and then the railways took the rest, and the great chain of desert inns fell quiet, link by link. But the buildings were built too well to disappear, and hundreds of them are still standing tonight, right now. Out along the old roads of Iran and Turkey and Uzbekistan, some ruined and open to the same stars, some restored, and a few, which pleases me more than I can easily say, working once again as hotels, so that a traveler tonight, this very night, can drive in through the one gate, sleep in a cell where 8 centuries of road-weary merchants slept before them, and here, if the wind is right and the imagination is willing, the ghost of the camel bells coming in off the road at dusk. Let that be our lullaby from this story. Then, the bells arriving, slower and slower. The gates swinging shut for the night. The bar dropping into its brackets with a boom that echoes once around the courtyard and dies away into perfect safety. The last lamp out, in the last niche. The stars wheeling over the square of walls, and the embers ticking, and the camels chewing their endless supper, and every road in Asia lying empty and silver and patient outside, waiting for morning, no concern of yours, no concern of anyone's, until the gate opens again. Sleep now, caravan. And while it sleeps, we will slip out over the wall the way only stories can, and begin the long road home, west, back toward the little town where we started tonight, because time has been moving while we traveled, whole centuries of it. And when we get there, something is about to happen on the high street, something small and bright and world-ending and world-beginning, and we should be standing on the corner to see it. The last story of the night is waiting, and it is called The Night the Lights Came On. And so we come to the last story of the night, and it begins where our first story ended, on the hill above that small English market town, looking down at the darkness where the town used to be. Only it is not the 1780s anymore. Time has been flowing past us all night, gently, the way it does in stories, and it is now the 1840s, 60 years on. The children who were sleeping two to a bed behind those shutters are grandparents now. And down on the high street, tonight, there is something that has never been there before in all the thousands of years that people have lived in this valley. There is a row of little flames that do not belong to anybody's candle. Gas has come to town. It came first to London in the early years of the century. Accounts differ on every detail except the wonder of it. A German-born promoter named Frederick Windsor lit a row of gas lamps along the wall of Pall Mall in 1807, to amazement and considerable alarm, and within a generation the idea had done what transformative ideas do. It had gone from impossible to inevitable without ever quite pausing at probable. Gasworks rose at the edge of every city, then every large town, then every ambitious small one. Trenches were dug, mains were laid, iron columns went up along the high streets, and by mid-century, the lamplighter, with his ladder and his pole, had joined the postman among the daily fixtures of ordinary life, making his rounds at dusk, town by town, all across the country, kindling the streets one flame at a time. Stand with me on the corner by the market cross and watch him work, because this exact scene, repeated 10,000 times across half a century, is one of the great hinges of human history, and it looks like nothing at all. A man in a worn coat, whistling softly, props his short ladder against the iron column. Up 2 rungs, 3. He turns the little cock. There is a whisper of gas, and he touches his flame to the mantle. A bloom of soft yellow light opens above the street, the size of a bedroom, no brighter than a good reading lamp. He climbs down, shoulders the ladder, and walks on to the next one, 30 yards along, and does it again and again, a slow constellation assembling itself behind him down the length of the street. By our standards, it was almost nothing, a chain of candles on posts. But nobody watching it that first autumn was using our standards. They were using the standards of the story we began tonight with, the standards of a world where light was rationed by the hour and the inch, where the streets after dark belonged to memory and the moon. And against those standards, this was the sky falling, gently, in a good way. The street now simply was lit, all night, every night, whether the moon came or not, whether you could afford a candle or not. Public light. Light as a service, like the church bell, like the well. Shopkeepers began leaving their window displays uncovered in the evening, and people came out, after supper, just to walk up and down and look at things, and the evening stroll along the lit high street became, within a decade, so ordinary that nobody could quite remember it being new. And the night itself began, imperceptibly at first, to change shape. This is the part of the story that the people living through it could not see, and we can. All the old architecture of the dark that we have visited tonight, and on other nights, rested on one great assumption, that when the light failed, the day was over. The early communal bedtime, the banked fire, the barred gate at dusk, in the town wall, and the caravanserai alike. The first sleep and the second sleep with the quiet watch between them, that ancient two-part night we explored together on another evening. All of it was built on darkness the way a bridge is built on a riverbed. And now the riverbed was moving. Evening, lit and warm and public, began to stretch. Bedtime drifted later, decade by decade. Shops stayed open past sunset, then past supper. The theater, the reading room, the night school, the evening shift. Slowly, gaslight taught the town to stay up, and what gas began, its successor would finish. Because the successor was already coming. In the autumn of 1879, in a workshop in New Jersey, and at nearly the same moment in a laboratory in England, the filament lamp was persuaded, at last, to burn steadily inside its little glass moon, and within a handful of years the new light was arriving in the towns, brighter than gas, cleaner than gas, and obedient in a way no flame had ever been. And here is the detail I find most tender, the detail that belongs in a bedtime story. For hundreds of thousands of years, without a single night's exception, extinguishing a light had meant touching it. A breath, a snuffer, a turned cock, a pinch of the fingers, some small physical negotiation with an actual flame. Fire had to be met in person. And then, suddenly, there was a small switch on the wall by the bedroom door, and the whole transaction shrank to the width of a fingertip. Click. Darkness, total and instant and perfectly safe. The first truly effortless darkness in the history of the world. People wrote to the newspapers about it. Children, the record suggests, stood by the door flicking the new light on and off, until they were told to stop, and honestly, who could blame them? It was the end of a relationship as old as the species, the nightly meeting between a human face and a small flame, leaning in, breathing out. The candle at the top of the stairs went out for the last time, in house after house, street after street, and hardly anyone marked the moment, because the new thing was so obviously, so overwhelmingly better. And yet, you knew there was an and yet coming, and here it is, offered gently, at the end of the night, with no alarm in it at all. Something was lost, and we have spent this whole evening among the things that were lost, so we can name them quietly, like old friends. The full, deep darkness went, first from the streets, then from the bedrooms. Then, as the glow of the cities spread up into the sky, from the night itself, until the great river of stars our little town used to sleep under, the one nobody down there ever remarked on because it was always there, faded from the view of most of the people of the world, who now live their whole lives without once seeing it. The two sleeps went, squeezed out by the long-lit evening, so completely forgotten that when people wake at 2 in the morning now, they lie there worrying that something is wrong with them, never knowing they are simply keeping their great-great-grandmother's oldest appointment. The veil went, the shared fire, the pooled light, the neighborhood tucked into one warm kitchen, replaced by 100 separate well-lit rooms. The lamplighter went, last of all, lingering in a few cities for a surprisingly long time, a ghost of the old economy of light, until the last rounds were walked and the ladders were hung up for good. None of this is a complaint. Nobody who has read a single page about the darkness of the old world, its dangers and its terrors and its sheer inconvenience, would trade it back. The lights were a mercy, and the world they made, the world you and I live in, where no child fears the dark street and no scholar ruins their eyes over a tallow flame, is the better world. But it is permitted, at the very end of a long story, to stand on the hill one last time and look down at both of them at once. The town of tonight, orange and steady, humming faintly, visible from space. And beneath it, like a watermark, the town we started with, the dark town, the sleeping town, the town folded away under its enormous sky, keeping its fires banked and its candles counted, resting so deeply in its darkness that we have spent a whole night just visiting it. And the old bargain of the night watch, the one we have met on every road tonight, did not end either. It only changed its uniform. The world of the lights still needs its watchers, and has them, more of them than ever. Out on the headlands, for a century and a half, the lighthouse keepers kept the newest and loneliest version of the oldest job there is, tending the one lamp that could not be allowed to fail, trimming wicks and winding clockwork through the small hours so that sleeping sailors, rocking in their hammocks somewhere out in the dark, could trust the coast to stay lit. In the new hospitals, the night nurses walk their slow rounds by shaded lamps, medicine's own gentle watch, listening to a ward full of breathing exactly as Walter the watchman once listened to his sleeping streets. Stokers kept the gasworks breathing while the town slept under its steady flames. Signalmen sat up in their lamplit boxes along the new railways, passing the night trains safely from hand to hand across the sleeping country. The names change, the lamps change, and the bargain underneath never changes at all. Every night, in every age, a few stay awake so the rest may sleep soundly, and the sleeping world returns the favor by resting well, which is, if you think about it, you're half of a very old contract, and you are keeping it beautifully just by lying here. Here is the good news, the news I have been saving for last. That older night is not gone. It is only waiting. It waits above the clouds and beyond the glow, and it comes back the moment you give it any chance at all, in the mountains, at sea, in the desert where the caravan slept, on any small road far enough from town, the same stars and the same river, entirely intact. And a private copy of it waits even closer than that. It waits by your bedroom door and at the switch on your lamp, because the whole point of the lights, in the end, was never to abolish the dark. It was to make the dark optional, to put night itself into your hand, so that darkness could become what it has been for you tonight, and what it never quite managed to be for all those centuries. Not a fear, and not a wall, just a blanket, chosen freely, pulled up at the hour of your own choosing, over a warm bed, in a safe room, in a world where the watch is kept and the gates are barred, and none of it, is your concern until morning. So, the lamplighter has finished his rounds, up and down the years, and so have we. The town is sleeping, both towns, all the towns, the ship and the snowbound farm and the caravanserai, and the whole long story of everyone who ever pulled a blanket up against the dark and trusted the night to carry them to morning. It has carried every single one of them safely there, billions upon billions of nights, and it is carrying you now. Thank you for spending the night in history with me. I'm the Yawning Historian. Good night.